So my name is Philip, and I'll be your guide for this session today. And it's called The Architectural Surprises of Columbus, Indiana. So we'll go ahead. I think some more people will probably join us, but I'll go ahead and get started now. So Kevin, also from GetSetUp, is in the background. Have any technical questions, please communicate with Kevin through chat and he will help out. And so what we're going to talk about today is that Columbus, Indiana is considered the sixth in the United States as far as architectural innovation and design. Most of us have never even heard of the town, and for it to be the sixth most significant city as far as architecture is a little bit of a surprise. It's also a relatively small town. So we're going to talk about how this happens, and it has a lot to do with the Miller family and with Cummins, the big diesel manufacturer that's based in Columbus, Indiana. And we're going to really see a lot of basically mid-century American architecture. So a lot of buildings designed in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, all the way up into the current era. They continue to add to it. So we're going to talk a little bit about how this has happened here in Columbus, and hope to entice some of you to maybe go visit Columbus, Indiana. And Sandy, thanks for joining us also. So just a quick question: have you ever even heard of Columbus, Indiana before, and its surprising architectural status? So if you want to comment on that or put a chat in, that's fine, but just sort of a little bit of a brain teaser there from that standpoint. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. So what and how did this happen? So Columbus, Indiana, you can see, is a relatively small town, about 47,000 people, yet the American Institute of Architects ranks it the sixth in architectural innovation, behind Chicago, New York, Boston, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. So all pretty big, well-established, known for their architecture towns. And then all of a sudden we get Columbus, Indiana. So the Visitor's Guide for Columbus lists over 90 buildings and pieces of public art by internationally noted architects and artists. So that's what's going on in Indiana. So how did this happen? Here, this is the interesting part of it. So the J. Irwin Miller Foundation, and this was the gentleman that was the president. His family was involved with Cumming, and he became the president of Cumming, the big, like I said, diesel manufacturer. He was very much an architectural person, and what he said, his foundation, so separate from the company itself that he was the president of, they would pay for architectural fees of anybody that wanted to have a building made, whether it be public or private, from a list of well-known architects around the world. So in other words, the foundation is going to pay for the architectural fees. The company will need to build, or the organization or the church, as we'll see lots of churches also, will need to, sorry, I lost the screen there. We'll need to pay for all the building and everything else associated with it, but the Miller Foundation would pay for these architectural fees from these well-known, world-renowned architects. So that's how it begins to happen. And then here's a time from a former critic of the New York Times architectural critic. Columbus, Indiana, and J. Irwin Miller are almost holy words in architectural circles. So you got to wonder what's going on here. So I believe Mr. Miller is very much a fan of good architecture, etc. But also, again, Cumming is based there. It's a relatively small town. He understands that it's going to be growing. They're going to need to continue to draw talent into the area. And I believe there's some synergies there with the company as to why he wants to build up and make Columbus somewhat of a different type of town to help bring in some additional talent for his company that he ends up running as the president of. So that's how it happens. It is the J. Irwin Miller Foundation that is paying for all the architectural fees from these well-known architects around the world. So it still has to take off, and it does indeed start taking off. And really the first one, so first, even before you get to Columbus, it's about, the city itself is about 2 or 3 miles off of Interstate 65. And as most of us can anticipate, Interstate 65 in middle of Indianapolis or Indiana is fairly flat. So Columbus is almost due south of Indianapolis, about 40 minutes due south of Indianapolis, just to get a reference as to where it is. Indianapolis pretty much being almost exactly in the center of the state, or both east to west, north and south. But you can see right away, getting off the expressway or driving by on the expressway, you can see a bridge that's a little bit different than most of the interstate bridges. And this is the exit here for Columbus. So even right off the bat, you start to see something different about it. While you're still on the interstate, even if you don't stop, just driving by, you start to see something of significance from there. And from there, it continues to grow. This is the bridge between the interstate and the town itself. Still haven't gotten to the city limits. So again, it's not just significant buildings, there's a lot of public art also, and then things like this bridge and some infrastructure that we'll see also changes. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and just talk about one more thing. So there's 7 buildings in Columbus, Indiana that have been recognized as National Historic Landmark Commission buildings, which is pretty extraordinary with the city that size. And then here at the bottom, I just talk about what is a landmark per the National Park Service, which you can read for yourself. But this is how it becomes, continues in significance and influence. So the first building I'd like to talk about is the First Christian Church, and it's done by Elur Saarinen. His son, Errol Saarinen, is probably even better known than his father, but this is the first building of significance that is built in Columbus after this invitation, so to speak, from Mr. Miller. So it's completed in 1942, and it is the first contemporary building in Columbus and one of the first churches of contemporary architecture in the United States. So to the left, we see an aerial view of the church itself, and then the bell tower off to the side. And then on the right of it, the right of it, we see one of the interior views. We're going to see a couple more in a couple of minutes. So these are, I think you can see, in case you're thinking they're monstrosities here, these are light fixtures, and we'll see a better perspective of those in a few minutes. But you can see the church, and is actually, the pews are stepped up or down, however you want to look at it, perspective. So think of it, most churches, everything is flat where all the parishioners are, and it's hard to see up to the altar, even though it's usually a lot higher. So here you can see Mr. Saarinen actually makes it like a stadium as far as the pews escalate. So now here's a look at the front of the church, and you can see it's sort of ingrained with a large stone cross right in the middle of it, almost hidden within the foundation itself. But you can see, if you look at it closely, there is indeed the cross. And then the bell tower itself is 166 feet high. And what's interesting, we talked about it being not only art, not only buildings, architecture, but also some art. And this, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is on the other side of the street. This is where the public library is, and this is then a piece of public art that's also been purchased by the city itself to help beautify the city. So then going back inside, here is another view, like we said, this stair step stadium style seating for the pews. And then you can see the cross on the inside. Sorry, this picture is a little bit blurry, but the cross on the inside pretty much replicates that cross we saw on the outside of the church in regards to style and function. So any questions or comments about this? Anybody want to talk about it a little bit more?
It was way ahead of their time, wasn't it? They can do all this.
Yeah, I think so. And this is just me personally speaking. I'm sort of surprised there aren't a lot. I haven't seen, but maybe a handful of churches where the congregation, is going to really be able to see up easily, with it being stair stepped. I'm rather surprised that more churches, recently built churches, haven't taken this view. But I guess the thought process, you raise the altar and everybody can see. But I sort of like this perspective even more. And then his son is actually Errol Saarinen, is probably even more famous, at least here in the United States, than his father. And he actually, I believe, has the most buildings designed within Columbus. So this one is was initially the Union Bank and Trust. It has been converted since then, but you can see it's basically a glass and steel building. This was designed in 1954. So Errol Saarinen was born in 1910 and lived until 1961. So he really died relatively young for our common era, so to speak. So he designs this one in 1954, and it has been magnified by another fairly well-known architect, Kevin Roche, and he has added this atrium passing through and then connected it to another building to amplify the size and the use of the building over the years. So a little bit more about Errol. Like I said, his father was also a well-known architect. And one thing that I find interesting about Errol is it's really sort of hard to distinguish. He's built some very significant big buildings in some of those major cities we've talked about, in particular New York, and then also in St. Louis. So, he was the designer of the famous TWA building, New York Airport, also designed the Gateway Arch in St. Louis. And a couple of other fairly well-known buildings throughout the country if you had not heard of him before. And what I find most interesting is buildings. It's hard to, if you look at a Saarinen design building, it's hard to follow one to the other. He doesn't use the same type of architecture. He customizes each one, or at least that's my interpretation of it. And really is a well-known architect in his own right, even though his dad preceded him. So probably the most famous building in the Columbus area is the Miller House and Garden. So this is indeed J. Erwin Miller. He has Saarinen design a house for him, mid-century house. Now, to see this house, you basically do have to sign up for a tour, just so you know. You cannot go to this house and just walk up. You need to sign up with the visitor center, and they actually have one of the little mini buses that holds about 15 or 20 people and drive you to the house. It is in a private residential area. Drive you to the house, and then you have a guided tour of the house. So this is the one that you do need to sign up for. Basically everything else, if you want to, you can hire guides and take guided tours, but all the other structures in the city, you can just sort of enter at your own pleasure, as long as they are open. I am not sure. Last time I checked, it was still closed, but my understanding is now that they are open. You'd want to double check. Obviously, you need to book a tour if you wanted to go see this. But this is a mid-century house, and as Shirley is saying, and I've heard of this architect here in Michigan. I'm not sure about his connection with Cranbrook. We'll have to look that one up. So the most famous part of the house is the sunken living room, conversation pit, as Saarinen called it. So you can see it off to the right in regards to the overall structure. This is the living room. What I find most interesting about this house is it basically has 4 wings that go off into the 4 parts of it. And one wing is basically the maintenance area, so to speak. The garage is there, storage areas, things like that. And then another wing that stretches off, it was for the children and the children's bedrooms. And then another wing was the eating area, so the kitchen and the dining room area. And then the 4th and final wing jets off, and it's the parents' bedroom. But to get to any of these wings, you have to come, you cannot, they're not interconnected, those 4 wings. You have to come through the living room area and then go out to another one of the wings if you want to go from one wing to the other. So it's very intriguing floor plan, at least in my mind, when I did tour it, and very interesting. The guide that we had talked about a few years earlier, one of the children to come back to visit the house, and heard some good stories about it. But you can see it's basically an art piece, and it was donated to the Indianapolis Art Museum. Again, Indianapolis is about 40 miles and 40 minutes away. It was donated to them. They restored the house, and it's now, probably for the last 5 or 8 years or so, has been available to tour the house from that standpoint. So that's why you do need to set up a tour beforehand. So here's a picture of the back of the house from the outside, and then another picture. So this is just off the living room area here. If you were to continue, you get to this water feature in the back of the house. And then here's another corner of the house leading from the driveway itself, sort of a hidden house as you are approaching it from the driveway. So this is one of the more popular mid-century houses. There's numerous ones throughout the country, and I know surely there is another one. I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, up in one of the suburbs of Detroit that is also fairly well known. I didn't think it was Cranebrook. I think it was something else. I have not visited that one yet, but there are some other mid-century houses, and that one is not done by Serenade. That one I'm sure of. So next, John Carl Warnick, another well-known architect, builds the McDowell Education Center. And here's a sort of a long view of it over here on the picture to the left. It's actually 4 smaller buildings that form the initial school when it was built. That's what it was built for in 1960. It is now an adult education center. And Warnick, at one point, had the largest architectural firm in the United States. His name maybe not quite as well known as others, but was very, very big. He worked on the Lafayette Park in Washington, D.C. as an example of one of the things he did. Another one, he did the Kennedy Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. So this is one of the 7 historic buildings that I talked about at the beginning of the U.S. Historic Landmark Commission. Again, mid-century, built, probably designed late 50s, built in 1960. A lot of glass and steel, a lot of openness, which was the trend at that particular time. So this is another one of my favorites. It seems to be a lot of churches again by Errol. And if you remember, I said he died in 1961. This is 1964, so he had designed it, but was not around when it was actually built. So you can see from this long range picture at the left, if you're looking at it from a certain angle, it looks like it's sort of growing up out of the ground. I can't tell what the heck this thing is, sort of mysteriously growing up from the ground. And now you can see on the inside of it, it is indeed 6-sided, and you can see the congregation is indeed sits on all the sides of it, and the altar itself is in the middle, sort of church in the round. So this was indeed, like I said, he died in 61. This was indeed the last building that he did design before he passed away. And then it was finished by some of his contemporaries. The spire itself measures up to, it's 192 feet up into the air, and there's a gold leaf cross at the very top of it. Relatively small since it's so high up there, but this is, again, one of the, I think, most beautiful buildings in the town itself, and just very unique. And again, to my thought process on Saarinen, that each of its buildings are a completely different texture in regards to designing it for the particular client that he's working for. So here's another view of it. You can actually see a little bit of the cross here. It's sort of hard to see against the bright blue sky, but indeed, this is looking at it from another angle, but still looks like, at least to me, fairly mysterious building from the outside. But for the spire and the cross, you have trouble thinking that this might be a church from that standpoint. Next, we're going to go to another church designed by Harry Weiss in 65. So as you can see, there's two sides to the building, and then the entry area in the middle of it. So this one is, you can see it's sort of peaked with a flat, both sides of it have a flat arched peak, and then the one on this side has the bell within it. And then the steep roof, which is twice as high as the supporting brick walls. So in other words, the roof here is twice as high as the wall itself down here. And you can see the inside of it, they use all that space just to magnify the importance of the church itself. So this is a Harry Weiss design in 65. So here's another picture where we can see now a better up close. Go back one, sorry. So this is where, over here on my left, where I'm circling with my cursor, that is now this next view where we're going to see, and the uniqueness of this bell tower, and then the bell itself buried up towards the top of the tower itself. Next, we're going to go to Myron Goldsmith, who was with Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, which is one of the biggest architectural firms in the world. And he's with them when he designs this in 1971. So this building, interestingly, was originally the newspaper press for the local Columbus, Indiana paper. And so literally it is now, as you can see on the right, is now an art gallery. And it's part of the university system of Indiana at this point. But where this art gallery is now, relative to this picture, that was literally where the printing presses were. So you could literally walk by, here's the sidewalk, here is that view, the same one. You could walk by and literally see the papers being printed. If you would come by at a certain hour early in the morning, I'm sure when the papers would be printing, you could actually see them be printed. So very different type of industrial building, serves a completely different purpose. And then as part of the Indiana University, the J. Irwin Miller Architectural Program has moved into this building, parts of its studies. So indeed, Mr. Miller's legacy continues, as we talked about from the beginning. This is another one of those 7 U.S. Historic Landmark Commission houses that we talked about earlier. Now I'd like to just talk about some other things. Here's another up close picture of the same building. You can see glass and steel is the emphasis on this one. So other architects of note, I.M. Pye, Richard Meyer, Caesar Pedley, Deborah Burke, Robert Venturi, and we did see already a Harry Weiss building. And then artists, we'll see him at Dale Chihuly, Gene Tingerly, and Robert Indiana. We'll see some of those here in a few minutes. So like I said earlier, it's not only the buildings, but some of the art also. So we're going to switch a little bit here. So this is Mill Race Park. This is a park within the city limits of Columbus. So it's got a big bell tower here. It's got a little covered bridge. And then as you can see, we're going to see a twin to this in a few minutes. This is sort of an over arching, but we're going to see some public art that sort of is a C for Columbus in a minute using the same red color. And it really becomes a bicycle stand. You can see the same red. This brick red is sort of the color of Columbus in some of its public art. So you can see this park was designed in 1992. We were there on a early fall day. You can see the colors are still pretty green, but beautiful 85-acre riverfront park. It's considered one of the top 100 parks in the nation for design, reputation, and accessibility. So moving into a little bit of Art Deco. So I think at this point now, I believe that Columbus has 6 different fire stations, and they all are of interest design. So the one on the left is called Fire Station Number 1, designed by Leighton Towers in 1941. So you can see the pure Art Deco design, and they still have a fire truck from that era. And it's still out there. The day when we drove by there, they had it out and they were working on it and polishing it and cleaning it. So they still use it, and it follows the Art Deco design. You can see the beautiful curved glass here and the overall Art Deco design. And then this is another fire station, number 5 or number 6. You can see completely different, a more modern building. This is the back of another one of the fire stations itself. So again, this is just some of that public art. This is actually the AT&T switching station. So the telephone company, their switching station, but even the telephone company gets into the act by just having some of their ventilation for the building follow some additional, give it some artwork pieces on it. You can see one of the other tall church spires. I sort of have centered between 2 of them here from that standpoint. This may be, I say it may because it's hard. This may be my favorite part of Columbus, just me speaking personally. So this is the war memorial. And so it's the Veterans Memorial for all the different wars. So what you're looking at here, we're going to show a couple other pictures. This is me standing right at the middle of it and just looking straight up into the sky. And so these are the memorials. They just stretch out into the sky, or so it appears. They go up over 140 feet up into the air. So this is an unusual look at it. So this is now back at ground level. And now you can see they have some commemoration of some of the different local people that were killed in various wars. And then in other stages, so you can, some of it is smoothed off so they can write on it. And other parts of it are very rough and coarse. And then in other areas, this is on the sidewalk, and it talks about Bartholomew County Veterans Memorial. And in other parts of it, they actually have some sayings. These come mostly from letters that some of these deceased servicemen or servicewomen sent home shortly before they died, and some of their comments. So they have these also engraved into some of the stones. So you can sort of get a feel now more at ground level how these things stretch way up into the sky. So to me, a fairly unique perspective for a war memorial, and how it stretches out and reaches up into the sky almost makes it feel sort of special, at least from my perspective when I was there. Any questions or comments? Wanda, you're being awfully quiet today. I know you've we've been together in some other sessions, and so hope you're doing well today.
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. So now I'm going to take you something completely different. This is a bed and breakfast. There are numerous, there's a couple of boutique hotels right in town. Then there's this bed and breakfast. And then right off the expressway, there are multiple chain hotels. And again, it's only 2 or 3 miles away. I'm just saying, if you're interested, there's a variety of type of places to stay. This is a bed and breakfast, but why I say it's so interesting, whatever, this is called the Inn in Irwin Gardens. So it actually is owned, or it was owned at one point by the Irwin family, the same family that we talked about, the J. Irwin was from, and who basically did a lot of the groundwork for having this town be so famous. So remember the Irwin Miller house that we saw, that mid-century house that we saw? Let's see if we can get back to it real quickly. So this is the house that he has designed for him as an adult. Mid-century, very modern, sleek glass, tile, slate. So back to where we were. This is the house that he grew up in. So quite different. It was well maintained, well restored. I think about 15 years ago now. It's not owned by the Miller family anymore, but it became a bed and breakfast. It's owned by another private individual that lives in Columbus. So it's called the Inn at Irwin Gardens. And the gardens part you can see in a second here. So this is literally the backyard. We're looking back from the very furthest point away from the house, looking back through the gardens back to the back of the house itself. So we were there, like I said earlier, in the fall time, so you can see the fall flowers that were the months that had just been planted. So this is the gardens of it. So this is quite different than that mid-century house that he ends up building, or has Saarinen build for him, from the perspective of where he grew up himself. Right. This is also right in town, or within the city limits of Columbus, just like the subsequent house that he had built. But completely different. And if you're interested in this type of house and staying at a bed and breakfast, this is a nice place to stay. You can just walk right out the door and you're right in the middle of the art. As a matter of fact, a couple of the churches, including the very first church we saw, is within a couple of 100 steps of the front door to this particular building. So just some more perspective of the gardens itself. And then this is some of the public art. Again, this is a sculpture. What's really interesting, I know a couple of you joined a few minutes late. When we first started, I told you I lived in Chicago. And when I went down to Columbus and saw this particular statue, I said, this looks fairly familiar in concept to some stuff in Chicago. And indeed, when I came back home and did a little more research on it, indeed it is. It's done by the same artist. So her name is Dessa Kirk. And the statue itself, she calls it EOS, E-O-E-O-S. And it was originally part of the 2006 Sculpture International. So this was a contest that they had in Columbus with different sculptors coming to put their work of art on display just temporarily. Well, the city itself so liked this piece of art that they ended up, or the community itself, not just the city, but a lot of the residents out, everybody seemed to fall in love with this. So they did a fund drive and they raised the money so that EOS permanent home could be in Columbus. So this is EOS is and I'm not real big on this, but from a little research, it's the Greek mythology is winged Enos was the goddess of the dawn, and she rose from her home on the edge of Oceanus, and then her brother Helos, the sun, could ride on her chariot across the sky. So as you can figure, this is east facing, and this particular one's and just a fairly beautiful representation, I think. That, like I said, the city of the people in Columbus liked, and ended up doing a fun drive for. As you can see, that red brick that we talked about is, I said, it's intertwined throughout the city here, even the street lights that are a little bit unusual in how they curve in, etc. But they are in that same brick red. Again, that motif of the whole city sort of interrelates, not just in the buildings, but in the public art and even the infrastructure of the city itself. So again, I'm not real big on Greek mythology. If anybody else has anything to add to it, I would be more than happy to turn it over to you to add any emphasis you may have that I may have missed on the perspective of this. So I referenced Dale Chihuly earlier. Fairly well known throughout the United States. He's based on the West Coast. So this is a Chihuly piece. This is actually in the Visitor Center. So in the heart of Columbus, they have a Visitor Center, which is gives a lot of information. Like I said, if you want to go tour the Miller House itself, that's where it starts, at the Visitor Center. That's where the bus takes. And there are other tours that go from there. You can also get a map of the city, and it lists all of the different structures, so you can do a self-guided tour. But in the stairwell itself is this Chihuly, which is a glass structure that he is famous for, doing multiple structures, variations in glass. You may have heard of it before. So they even have a Chihuly in their visitor center. So a few words about Miller. Said again, he was sort of a private man, but a good life is one led in praiseworthy competition with one's ancestors. The best response to the gifts we receive from previous generations is to create something of lasting value in our own time and in our own way for future generations. So this is some of the thought process I talked about earlier, that he was his view and value of architecture. But I said part of it, I think, was he wanted to build a better city to help the company he ran grow, but part of it was based on his philosophy that he's outlined very well in this particular sentence. And that's sort of the end of my slides, but I do have a couple more hidden here if you will go back. So we talked about the public art. So this is a piece of public art. And this I Am Pie, who probably most famously known for the new entranceway at the Louvre Museum in Paris. This is he designed the public library in Columbus, and the picture on the right is an inside of the library itself, and on the left behind the statue is actually the library also. But inside you can see some of the glass representation and how he plays with the linear abilities of that. So this is City Hall, and sorry, SON, that's Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill that we talked about earlier, one of the biggest architectural firms in the world at this point in time. So this is two different views of the City Hall, and you can see it plays with that cantilevering effect by having the entrance wall, so to speak, be floating out there and then not come together in the middle. So again, just another play on the design there. And then we talked about artists also. So here is this is within one of the buildings itself. This work was commissioned in 1971, and you can see it here, and it's called Chaos 1, which sort of makes sense to me in regards to what it looks like. There's a lot going on there. Again, like I said, it's not only architecture, but it's all of all of the art scene, public art, in regards to how Columbus is growing. So just a couple things. Columbus is the sixth most architecturally significant city in the United States. We talked about how it happened. And it is sort of a living museum. I sort of like this living museum of mid-century architecture. That's really what it is. If you're not too far away from Columbus and want to do something a little bit unusual for a break for a weekend, that's an interesting place to go if you have some interest in architecture. It's fairly close to, like I said, it's about 40 minutes from Indianapolis. So if you want to stay in the bigger city and then drive down and spend a day in Columbus, you can. Or there's some good facilities and places to stay itself right there in Columbus. And I promise you, you can, if you're so inclined, you can spend a couple of days wandering around, self-guided tours with the map, playing around and enjoying some of the architecture yourself if you're so inclined. Or obviously you can look at some more online also.